Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to Lunch and Learn Live. Happy Monday. How are you, Miss Carissa?
I'm doing well. Thank you. How are you?
Good. We got a hot topic tonight. We're going to talk about, or today, we're going to talk about feeding your brain. So, nutrition and our brain health, because it's such an important conversation, I think. So, welcome to those of you who are joining us for today's Lunch and Learn Live. I'm off center here. Here we go. The light is hitting me in such a weird way. Anyway, so I'm going to ignore the way it all looks. So I think it is a good place for us to start. I think a lot of women come in and they worry about brain fog. And a lot of people today are also worried about, they're worried about their brain and their brain health as Alzheimer's and dementia are literally skyrocketing. And I think that it's important for us to be preemptive, right? To be really truly preventative in looking at what can we do before we get to the point where dementia or Alzheimer's or something like that actually sets in. And so that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, that's awesome.
How do you protect your brain?
Well, for a long time, and I'm sure other people can relate, I didn't really think much about how what I ate affected my brain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know, and many of us know that like food fuels our bodies, right? But I never really considered that it could be influencing my mood, my focus, or even my memory.
Yes.
Right. But as you dive deeper into like the health and wellness, I learned that scientists, right, actually call it our second brain.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because like that direct highway of communication between the gut and the brain. So what we eat literally shapes how we think, how we feel, and how we function, which is kind of great news, right? Because we have choice over that as well.
Yes.
I think understanding that is very impactful.
Well, yeah, we don't have to lose our minds, literally,
Mhm.
right? We can start to do things preemptive. So let's go through some of those things. So I like what you said about your second brain, because that's what our gut is called. Our gut is called the second brain. And when it comes to our gut health, it is one of the primary things that we can pay attention to if we want to have a clear mind and focus and be able to not be walking around our day in a fog or not have, extremes of anxiety and depression and those things like that. But, paying attention and being mindful of our gut is that first step in that process. And so one of my first recommendations for people is always, pay attention to your gut health. One of the first things for that and paying attention to our gut health is number one, making sure that there is enough fiber. In all of our detox programs, or we just overall, you and I were always like, eat your vegetables, get your fiber in. Are you eating your vegetables? Are you moving your bowels? I mean, if you're not moving your bowels, you are literally toxifying versus detoxifying. And that plays a really big role. But it's not just the fiber in all those vegetables. It's the micronutrients, it's the polyphenols, it's all the stuff that makes up those vegetables that actually provides our bodies with the nutrition that it needs so that our brain can function. And the other thing that happens is when we have the fiber in our GI system, it feeds the good bacteria. And if we're not feeding the good bacteria, then we're not keeping our GI system in check. And the truth is, if you take antibiotics or things like that, it's, all good and bad, all gets wiped out in that GI tract. And the bad stuff grows so much easier than the good stuff. So if we're not paying attention to putting that stuff back in, then we're not actually getting the results that we want with our health. So even getting in those probiotic rich foods like that real live sauerkraut, I'm not talking about like the bag stuff on the shelf, but like in the refrigerator section of the store, that is really important. Making sure too, the other piece is you want to think about, when there's fiber in the GI tract and it is their gut has its own sort of fermentation process. It creates what we call short chain fatty acids, things like butyrate, and these things actually reduce our inflammation. They support the brain because they support the blood brain barrier. And when we've got that going on, now we can, again, up level our gut microbiota, and that's so important.
1000%. To piggyback off of that, the gut has over 100 million nerve cells. So it's constantly sending messages to the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to bring up too, because I never recognized this. And, when you're taking Advil, when you're taking Tylenol, it's not something we think of because you can go right to the pharmacy, you can go wherever, you can go to your friend's house, and you're just popping these things because you have a headache, you have an ache or pain, but it inflames the gut.
Yes.
It inflames your kidneys and your liver. And if the gut is inflamed and out of balance, it triggers the anxiety, the depression, the brain fog. And something that I didn't know, I don't know if other people know, is 90% of your serotonin is made in the gut, not in the brain.
Let's be happy.
It's fascinating. When I learned that fact, I was like, no way. Because for a long time, I always thought those feel-good neurotransmitters were made in your brain. But they're not. A small percentage of it is, yes. I believe, right? But the majority of it is made in the gut.
Happy gut, happy life.
Yeah, it's true.
Skip the happy wife. We know the happy wife thing is important too, don't we? Yeah. I think the other thing that feeds into the gut, but just feeds into brain health overall, is blood sugar and blood sugar regulation. And, we talked a lot about fiber, but the thing about fiber and vegetables and all of that is what most people don't realize is one of the roles when we're eating, when we're taking in that fiber, is it does lower the glycemic effect of other things that we're eating. It's like that fiber almost acts like a filter so that we're not having these blood sugar spikes. And that's a big deal. Alzheimer's, dementia, they call it type 3 diabetes.
Yeah.
And why are they calling it type 3 diabetes? Because there's such a strong connection with what's happening with blood sugar regulation in our brain. So, it's not a surprise, you guys, if you've worked with us or you're planning to work with us, we're going to talk about sugar and eliminating sugar from your diet because it's so critical. When we've got really high insulin levels, that impacts our cognitive function, right? If we're always spiking insulin, then that becomes an issue, and the other thing is, one of the things we see, Carissa, you can vouch for this. One of the things we see in the practice is sometimes women will come in and they've been such on this yo-yo dieting thing that they really believe that not eating is the answer to their weight problems. And so they just kind of essentially starve themselves. But when you're not eating for long periods of time, you actually end up having really low blood sugar. And when your blood sugar comes down, guess what comes up to feed it? The cortisol comes up to feed it. Okay. And then the adrenaline's released, and then we're irritable, we're cranky, we have anxiety because our blood sugar tanked, right? So that's the hangry, hangry that people get. But that's part of what's happening. And it's so funny. A lot of our, our clients are perimenopausal, menopausal, postmenopausal women, and they're having these, extreme hot flashes and mood swings and things like that. And they're like, oh, but I've got to lose weight, so I've got to fast all the time. And they're not doing it in conjunction with their body. And so again, it's this constant low blood sugar crash, cortisol comes in, and now our adrenals are stressed out. And when, we're in that menopausal state where we're not, our adrenals pick up the load for some of the sex hormone production. So if our adrenals are completely burnt out, that's part of the reason why we're experiencing these extreme menopausal symptoms. So paying attention to our blood sugar balance is really important when it comes to our brain and really protecting our cognitive function.
Yeah. When the brain isn't getting enough oxygen, when the brain isn't getting enough, nutrients from food, it doesn't have the proper energy supply,
Yeah,
right? So, and your body too, like it's going to pull it from wherever. So
somewhere.
it's going to raise your cortisol. It's going to raise your adrenaline. So it releases the glucose and it's like, oh, okay, now we can function.
Yes.
But if you're not getting the proper nutrition, like if you're starving yourself to try to lose weight, it's going to have the adverse effect. You may
Yeah.
lose a couple pounds in the beginning, right? Sure. But you're going to start to experience brain fog. You're going to start to experience a standstill. And then when you eat anything, your body is just probably going to gain a lot of weight because it doesn't know what to do with that now.
Yeah. And you've changed your metabolism, unfortunately, right? Your body's not dumb. So if you're all of a sudden not eating and your body's like, oh my gosh, I'm starving. Well, what's it do?
Mhm.
It takes that fire and slows that fire down because that's what's in the best interest of your long-term survival.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't your body doesn't care what what the scale says, right?
Yeah.
It cares about its survival. And if slowing down your metabolism enhances its survivability because it thinks it's starving, then it's going to do that. So it's really important for your brain when you're eating to make sure that you're stabilizing your blood sugar levels. So things like eating all the fiber, like if you're going to sit down to a meal, eat the salad first. There's some wisdom there to having that salad before you have anything else, right? Or eating your meal before you eat the dessert. Cause then again, you've got like that filter in your system. So you're not having those crazy spikes. The other thing is breakfast. I think it's a really important one to talk about because American breakfast is sugary cereals, croissants, rolls, donuts, all these things that destabilize our blood sugar. And so it's important to make sure that you're starting your day. Number one, you want to make sure you've got some protein in that breakfast to begin to stabilize your glucose levels and that you're not having a sugar filled breakfast because that is going to set you up the day for feeling exhausted, for having those peaks and troughs that really send you into that spiral in time in terms of your focus and attention and your energy levels. So make sure that you're giving some extra love and care to your breakfast. And it's so true. I forget I don't remember the exact words of the saying, Chris, and maybe you remember, but it's like breakfast is fit for the king and lunch is this and dinner is I forget what
I
the
don't
exact
remember, but yes, and it's very common over in Europe,
yeah.
right? I mean, my mother came from there, and they used to, have a big breakfast, even lunch. If you worked out of the home, you all got to leave and come home and have lunch with your family, and lunch was considered like the meal of the day, and then dinner was something, very light.
Yeah. And it's important too. So going back to the GI system and how important that is, our second brain. If you're eating late at night, your food while you're sleeping is not digesting. So consider, just give you a visual. What's happening is you've taken food into your mouth that's sitting in your body now, and it's literally rotting and putrefying because it cannot be processed while you're sleeping. Your digestive fire is down. And nightmares. By the way, those of you who if you've eaten late at night, you're more prone to have nightmares, believe it or not. Okay. So that's another thing to really pay attention to is you want to be having your heavier meals during the day, your lighter meals at night. And I always say, I know for those who like intermittent fasting, it's like, oh, I'm going to start later in the day. And I know that's convenient because we're used to eating dinner, at 6 or 7 o'clock. For some people, it's later, and that's way too late, you guys. But if you are doing something like intermittent fasting, you just want to move it's so much better to move your schedule the other way around. So have your meal in the morning and do your fasting later over the course of the night. It's so much better for your body's natural rhythms, and having that lighter dinner is important.
Yeah, and I think it's great that you mentioned that because I don't think people really understand fasting very much, right? They think it's just without food and they're kind of all over place, but there is a way to do intentional fasting.
Yeah.
You know, and I think we've talked about that. And maybe we'll do a class on it, or maybe we have. But you know, I love fasting, and I see its benefits. But there is a way to do it.
And I think, Chris, I think sometimes we see a lot of women, especially, they're using fasting as a punishment.
Yes.
And when you go into dietary changes, or you go into improving your diet, or you go into exercise, or you go into fasting as a punishment, that has its own consequences, right? So if you're looking at, you're going into it and you're like, this is an opportunity for my body to heal, for my body to thrive, it's a very different piece. You know, we are going back, we are energetic, vibrational beings. And our thoughts do impact everything that happens within our body, right? Some say it impacts everything that happens out in the universe, right? That,
Yeah.
and I personally subscribe to that as well. Our
Yeah.
thoughts are really powerful. Our thoughts, our emotions, our feelings. So if we are looking at ourselves or we're beating ourselves up, that has an impact. I mean, in our Body Beautiful program, we are going to dive so deep into this because we have to understand how it impacts us. It's just so super critical. So you want to look at what you're doing, even if it's your exercise routine. It's not a punishment, you know?
No, it should be something that makes us feel good. And I
Yeah.
think it's a really powerful point that you just made, because I do work with a lot of clients who say, "Oh, I overate, or I did this, so I'm just going to intermittent fast, or I'm just going to
Yes.
fast tomorrow." And I always tell them that's one of the worst things you can do,
Yes.
because A, it makes fasting so, like torture. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? When you're coming off of eating like that, and your body, your blood sugar is just not going to balance very well. Like there's really, like, to get to, you know, the effects, the benefits of it, it's going to take you days. So you may as well jump on the wagon of, you know, eating your leafy greens and having a savory breakfast and prioritizing healthy foods before you start a fast.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Another thing I want to talk about for the brain that I think is very important is fat, right?
Mm,
Essential fats, they are fuel for the brain.
yes.
DHA, EPA, these are really important. And I will say that good fats are good for the brain and bad fats are bad for the brain. Okay?
Hmm.
Not just the brain. The truth is, it's every single cell in our body, because every single cell has that cellular membrane that is made of lipids. So, but because we're focused on the brain today, I think it's important for us to point this out. So you want your brain to be made of high quality fats, which means you've got to be taking in really good high quality fats. And those of you who are still eating seed oils, you want to cut those out of your diet. And I know if you're buying processed or packaged foods, it's nearly impossible because they're using soybean oil, sunflower seed oil, canola oil, palm oil. They're using all of these things in those products that we do want to avoid. Ideally, I mean, I have always been a strong proponent of saying, hey, just eliminate oils. Eat your oils in your food. Eat your olives, eat your avocado, eat your coconut, rather than having to, use oils all the time. Get it from its real food source. But at the very minimum, you want to pull out those seed oils because they are disruptive to the brain, right? They're
Yeah.
not giving your brain what it needs. But having that DHA, for example, that EPA, those omega-3 essential fatty acids, those are really important. I personally, I do use Premier Research Labs DHA, which I think is amazing. And I think you can feel the difference when your brain is getting all that it needs to be able to process and function, you know?
Agreed. And it's no coincidence that walnuts look like a brain,
Yes, walnuts look like a brain, so we really like
because they
that.
nourish those brain cells.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's certainly important. So think about, where are you getting those essential fatty acids? I mean, I personally, I do really like chia pudding, so I like to
Mhm.
have chia pudding in there. If you're doing like a salmon to get your omega 3s in, do make sure that you are using wild caught versus farmed, right? Because the farmed is not the same thing. The fatty acid composition is not the same. So you really want to be aware of that as well.
Yeah, definitely. And just doing like simple things, right? Like swapping your processed carbs for complex carbs, like quinoa, lentils, sweet potatoes, and having those things in the morning, right? Because they'll give you steady energy throughout the day without having crashes.
Yeah.
And throwing some pumpkin seeds, which are high in magnesium, almonds, leafy greens, like those foods all support the nervous system too.
Yes.
So it's like these little shifts that we can do, right? We don't have to overhaul, at one time, but that's why the program's so great too, right? Because we're taking you through things weekly, and it's not an overhaul to where you feel overwhelmed, but just make these like simple switches, and it
Mhm.
really does benefit.
Yeah, and there are some key nutrients that I would tell people to make sure that they're getting. So number one, the DHA. Zinc is also really important. It's really important for the neurotransmitters. So sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, chickpeas, all good ways to get that zinc in. Iron is another one. I mean, your body needs that oxygen. So especially if you're someone who tends to run iron deficient, you want to make sure that you're getting that iron in. So I love plant-based sources of the iron. So your spinaches, your pumpkin seeds, that's another important. And don't forget vitamin D. Like most people, and we look at a lot of lab work, most people are deficient in their vitamin D. And vitamin D is important for your immune system, but it is a modulator of inflammation. And when there's inflammation, that impacts the brain. So you want to make sure that you are getting that in. And Carissa, you already said magnesium, which is really important. We often recommend magnesium for our clients because it's important for the adrenals. It's important for so many different things in the body. Really helps to feed the brain. And getting in your green leafy vegetables, for example, is one way that you can actually get lots of magnesium into your diet. So that's some stuff that I would be on the lookout for as well.
Yeah. The brain, I think, needs to be flexible, adaptable, right? And then, so if you introduce like chronic stress, poor diet, inflammation, like that's what causes all that, like that mental sluggishness. So, eating a whole nutrient dense diet, taking your supplements, prioritizing sleep. I know you mentioned it before, how eating later on in the evening can really disrupt this sleep, and that's true because the brain, it clears out its toxins and it repairs itself overnight, and it can't really do a great job of that if it's digesting food.
Right.
So everything just moves a little bit slower because your body's trying to do all its repair at night.
Yeah, there's two more things I want to talk about. I know we're starting to come up at the top of the hour here in just a few minutes, but number one is food sensitivities, and people don't often even recognize how much, if your body is having an inflammatory response to something, right? I mean, gluten, dairy, sugar, those are at the top of the list, you guys. But when that's happening, what happens is the gut is impacted, and then your brain is impacted, your mood is impacted, your cognition is impacted, your focus is impacted. So you want to really hone in on, and I know in our programs, it's always important that people go through an elimination protocol, that they're becoming back into relationship with their body. They'll be like, oh my gosh, I took gluten out. And sometimes people are like, I took gluten out of my diet before and I saw no difference. And we're like, did you really take it out 100%? Because when people sometimes bring it back in, if they're sensitive, they're like, oh my gosh, like I won't do that again because I can feel the difference. So you want to get in touch with your body's response, and how your body is actually being impacted by things. And that requires connection, right? We're so often disconnected from our bodies that we don't even notice these subtle clues that our body is giving us. But when we start to actually tune in, things shift. So you want to pay attention to those food sensitivities. That's really important. And then the last one here, and this is across the board for everything, you guys, across the board for everything. And that is your hydration. Oh, Katie, I'm so glad this is landing for you. That is your hydration. You guys, if you're not getting water, first of all, your body it's electric essentially, right? It works on frequency and vibration and sound, and it needs the hydration in order for everything to be able to process and flow the way that it was designed. So if you're not hydrating, right, even as little as a 2% loss in your hydration. So you're not dehydrated, you're just like slightly dehydration. Now your memory is off, your attention is off, your mood is off. Okay. And that's just at a small amount of dehydration. So make sure that you are drinking half your body weight in ounces of water. You're starting that way off in the morning. And make sure too that you've got like your electrolytes are balanced, like you're getting in the sodium, the potassium, the magnesium, because that electric is what allows the messages to move throughout your brain. So if you are dehydrated and you don't have the right minerals, then things are not going to operate the way that they're supposed to. And for all you coffee drinkers out there who start your morning with coffee, you guys, coffee is a diuretic. So it actually dehydrates your body. So I want you to just do the numbers here with me. So if you're 100 pounds, for example, you need to drink half your ounces in your body weight in water. So that means you need to drink 50 ounces of water. But let's say you have a cup of coffee, okay? That cup of coffee has now depleted you 8 ounces of water, okay? So if you actually need to drink 16 ounces to add back that 8 ounces, because you need to put the 8 ounces that you depleted. And then if you're adding more, you need to add it back. So you've got to understand that each cup of coffee that you are having is pulling out your hydration as well. So if you drink coffee and you're like, well, I just have 1 cup of coffee. Well, then make sure you're having multiple cups of water in the morning to counterbalance that coffee, or skip the coffee, have a nice cup of herbal tea. Then that actually counts towards your hydration rather than against your hydration. The same thing goes for any other kind of caffeinated beverages. So if you're a green tea drinker, you still have to consider that as well. But coffee is the big one, you guys. Be aware of your coffee intake. Plus,
that was so powerful, Danielle. Everything you just said about hydration was really, really powerful. I loved it. It really was just how you explained the body and everything. It was very beautiful. And I know, I just want to remind everyone, like, it can feel overwhelming, right? But knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. And you don't need to change everything at once. But when you understand, right, the more you can make small intentional choices. So just take 1 or 2 things that stood out here today. Maybe it's drinking more water. Maybe it's reducing your caffeine intake. Maybe it's adding walnuts to your breakfast, or cutting your meals down to earlier. Every little change just helps you move towards like a sharper, clearer mind. The brain is always adapting. And it's never too late to support it. I think people should understand that. It's never too late. So just start making a healthier choice today.
Yeah. And you guys, we talked about really feeding your brain today. But don't forget, these cell phone thingies, they really disrupt our brain and our brainwave patterns. So be aware of that too. Yeah. Remind yourself as often as possible to put that thing away.
There's a lot of scientific research on it. It's just hidden. You just have to go looking for it. It's there.
Yeah, and the more research they do, the more worrisome, honestly, it becomes. So you really want to be cognizant.
And I wish they would broadcast it, right? Because you don't know to ask these questions until you ask them, and then you can find it. But otherwise, these peer-reviewed studies are not in your face until someone sparks a question. You're like, oh. So hopefully we gave, our listeners some of that to look into.
Yes. All right, everyone. We will see you Monday for Lunch and Learn Live again at 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. Have a good week, everybody.
Enjoy the beautiful weather.
Yes, I know. Spring is here. Yeah. Bye, everyone. Bye.